Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Diablo 3 Build Factory. My name is Phobos and today's topic will be about the Grenadier Suicide Build, or Grenadier Suicide Bomber-Build like I called it in the title. I'm finally back from my trip over the last weekend and I'm ready to do a lot more content for you guys. I hope you will enjoy it, but today's topic will be more about this exotic build, and actually one of you guys asked me if this build is viable or not. So let's take a look and see if the final verdict is yes, this is viable for Inferno mode, or if it's not. So let's take a look. So basically, if you don't know what Grenadier means, Grenadier is actually a passive skill that you unlock on level 45, and this whole build revolves around this passive skill. And the tooltip says it increases hatred generated from grenades by 2 and reduces hatred cost of cluster arrow by 10. Upon death, you drop a giant grenade that explodes for 804% weapon damage as fire. So pretty similar to some monsters. You may have witnessed this already when you played higher difficulties. Sometimes monsters drop a firebomb which explodes like 2 to 3 seconds later upon death. And with this passive skill you basically become something like that. The main question now is, how do I utilize this ability to its full extent, because 804% weapon damage is quite a lot, but the main question is it enough to finish off champion packs, and in the footage you will see if it's good enough or not. Another thing that you have to keep in mind is, when playing this playstyle you will become a suicide bomber, and therefore you will die a lot and pile up a lot of repair costs. That's something that you need to keep in mind, really. So while I was tinkering around with this build and trying different stuff, I actually died a lot, and I died a lot on purpose, of course, and also in the footage here. So that's something that you need to keep in mind. Also, you have to think about picking one of the skills that benefit from this passive skill to make the most out of it, because you're not on Nightmare or Hell anymore, you're on Inferno mode. You want to make the most out of your build with the most options and the best options. So let's take a look at this and see if it's viable for Inferno or if it's just a lot of garbage. Okay, let's take a look at both of these skills that benefit from the passive skill that is Grenadier. And that is for 1, grenades, and for 2, cluster arrow. You unlock these skills on level 15 and level 27. And I would say, let's start with grenades. Grenades generate 3 hatred per throw, and the tooltip says throw out 3 grenades that explode for 95% weapon damage as fire each. Let's take a look at cluster arrow first, and then let's talk about the runes and how you can utilize both of these skills in this build. Cluster arrows cost 50 hatred, that's quite a lot, but if you consider that you have the Grenadier passive skill, it will be 40 hatred. The tooltip says fire a cluster arrow that explodes for 200% weapon damage as fire into a series of additional miniature bombs that explode for 100% weapon damage as fire each. So quite a lot of damage. Now, the thing is, both of these skills actually do the same thing, that is area of effect damage. The main question now should be, which one of these is better than the other, because you can only pick so many skills on your action bar, and most probably, especially on Inferno mode, you already have skills picked like Shadow Power, or Smoke Screen, or Preparation, or Vault, or Call Drops. You really need these skills, so you can't pick both of them to really utilize this build correctly, or to utilize it in a way that it is effective. So you have to keep in mind, okay, do I need a skill that generates a lot of hatred, or do I want a skill that costs a lot of hatred but is therefore more powerful? So let's take a look at the runes first, and then let's say which one is more viable. So while I was playing with grenades, I actually died a lot, and quite honestly I don't recommend grenades at all on Inferno mode, because they do way too less damage. But if you insist on playing with grenades, I'd recommend gas grenades on level 60. Because you can create something like a wall of gas in which enemies take a lot of damage, yeah. But I also tried these stun grenades, didn't utilize them to an extent where I would say, okay, I'm satisfied with the result, even with the firebomb rune, and seriously, try to avoid it if you can. If you really like it, you can try, but in my opinion you inflict way too less damage and you should pick another skill for the grenade. An appropriate alternative to the grenades and the hatred generation would be Bad Companion with the companion ability that is unlocked on level 17/level 29, and this skill is really good if you have hatred problems, so I would say go with this skill, don't pick grenades, it's really not that worth it to go with grenades. Bad Companion is much better for hatred generation concerning this topic. Now let's talk about the rune for cluster arrow, and I picked Loaded for Bear on level 58, and the tooltip says increases the damage of the explosion at the impact location to 290% weapon damage as fire. And 290% weapon damage, that's quite a lot. Of course you can do this massive AoE damage on a lot of enemies, but with 290% weapon damage you have a really nice weapon to do a lot of damage against single targets, and this is especially really useful against uniques and champion packs. Okay, enough for the skills. Now let's talk about the build itself and how to utilize it correctly. Now what a lot of people might assume is that you can bomb your way through uniques and champion packs alike, and actually this doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. Of course you do a lot of damage, 804%, that's quite a lot, but it isn't enough to kill a lot of enemies and everything inside. It doesn't work that way. That's something you have to keep in mind. So when playing this build, you want to do at least an appropriate amount of damage first before committing suicide. So let's say you have a lot of problems on Nightmare mode or Hell mode. The Suicide Bomber build there could be much more beneficial than on Inferno mode, because on Inferno mode enemies have a lot more HP, a lot more, a hell of a lot more. So let's say that you get champion packs to like 20% HP, and then most of the time you die. With the Grenadier Suicide Bomber-Build you might have that little more damage to do the final killing blow to this champion pack. And let's face it, a lot of people starting Inferno die a lot to champion packs in the beginning. And what you have to keep in mind is that sometimes champion packs and uniques refill their energy while you are dead. Sometimes they even refill their energy instantly. So that's something that you really have to keep in mind, because you can't just commit suicide all the time. You can't just run into them, kill yourself and do this rinse and repeat. It won't work that way. You have to keep this in mind. Also, you will have to have an appropriate amount of weapon damage, because your explosion depends on this weapon damage, like the tooltip says. So, considering all of these facts, this build could be very beneficial to players which struggle solo on Inferno mode, starting Inferno mode especially, because let's face it, a lot of people will die, especially in the beginning and especially to champion packs. So why don't try something exotic and try to inflict the final killing blow with your own explosion? Just fight fire with fire. But as always there's a but, and this but has a huge exclamation point, and I really think you guys should know, because this is personal preference now, of course, but the thing is, the farther you get into Inferno mode, the less viable this build becomes, at least in my opinion, because the suicide bombing only helps so much later on Act 3 for instance, or on Act 2 even. The footage here is from Act 2. You can see how much damage I inflict on the monsters upon death, and that isn't quite a lot. So it's either bomb your way through monsters, and like I already mentioned, it won't work that way, at least for all monsters, or just fight your way through Inferno with an appropriate build. So now let's talk about the final verdict. Grenadier Suicide Bomber-Build, it's viable for Act 1, but it becomes less and less viable for Act 2, 3 and even 4. And also when playing solo you can benefit a lot from this build, especially for Nightmare and Hell mode. But when playing solo on Inferno, you should only do this until the end of Act 1. And also I wouldn't recommend this build for hardcore characters, but this should be clear, I guess. And that's all I got for you today. I hope you enjoyed this exotic build. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but maybe it's something you should try if you have problems in Hell mode or Inferno mode. So, as always, make sure to press the like button, it's really much appreciated. And also make sure to subscribe if you want to stay up to date for more action from the Diablo 3 Build Factory. But until then, I wish you a really nice day and I see you next time. Goodbye.